Emptiness is not a punishment, even though the mind interprets it that way. The mind is trained to associate discomfort with failure, loss, or wrongdoing. When something hurts, the first question becomes, what did I do wrong? But emptiness does not arrive to accuse you. It arrives to inform you. It is a signal that something within your life, your identity, or your attachment system is no longer aligned with who you are becoming. Punishment implies judgment. Emptiness carries none. It comes quietly, without explanation, without blame. It simply shows up as a hollow space where something once lived. That space feels frightening because you were conditioned to believe that fullness equals success and emptiness equals lack. But this belief is shallow. Fullness can be unhealthy. You can be full of expectations, full of dependency, full of borrowed meaning, full of identities that were never truly yours. Emptiness signals that the inner structure you relied on has collapsed. Not because it was evil or wrong, but because it was temporary and you treated it as permanent. When something external becomes the source of your inner stability, imbalance is created. Emptiness is the correction. It is the moment the illusion dissolves. Many people confuse emptiness with depression, but they are not the same. Depression weighs you down. Emptiness clears you out. Depression feels heavy, sticky, suffocating. Emptiness feels vast, quiet, unfamiliar. The discomfort does not come from the space itself, but from your resistance to it. The mind panics because it has nothing to cling to. The ego feels exposed because it cannot define itself without reference. Emptiness is a signal that you have outgrown something you are still holding onto mentally. The body knows before the mind accepts. Long before you consciously admit a relationship no longer serves you, emptiness begins to whisper. Long before you accept that a path no longer fits, emptiness settles in. It is not there to push you into despair. It is there to prevent stagnation. Stagnation is more dangerous than emptiness. When you remain full of outdated beliefs, outdated attachments, outdated versions of yourself, growth becomes impossible. Emptiness creates movement by removing excess. It creates space so that life can reorganize itself. The universe does not speak in words. It speaks in sensations, patterns, and inner states. Emptiness is one of its clearest messages. It says, stop filling your life with what no longer belongs. It says, pay attention. It says, something is ending so something truer can begin. You were taught to fear emptiness because you were taught to define yourself by what you have. Who you are with, what you do, how you are seen. When those things weaken or disappear, you feel as though you are disappearing too. But emptiness does not erase you. It reveals what remains when the noise fades. At first, emptiness feels like being lost. In reality, it is the moment before reorientation. When a compass spins wildly, it is not broken. It is recalibrating. Emptiness is that recalibration. It strips away false direction so that true direction can emerge. The reason emptiness feels so intense is because it forces you into presence. There is nothing to distract you, nothing to lean on, nothing to hide behind. You are face to face with yourself without labels, without roles, without external validation. This confrontation feels uncomfortable because most people have never learned how to sit with themselves without performance. Emptiness is a signal that you are being asked to build from the inside instead of borrowing from the outside. When your happiness depends on something external, you become fragile. When that external source shifts, your inner world collapses. Emptiness teaches self-sufficiency at a deep level, not in isolation, but in rootedness. Many people rush to escape emptiness by replacing what was lost. A new relationship to numb the absence of the old. A new goal to distract from the collapse of the previous one. A new identity to avoid sitting with uncertainty. But this is how the signal gets ignored. When you bypass emptiness, you repeat the same patterns in different forms. Emptiness is not asking you to act immediately. It is asking you to listen, to observe what arises in the silence, to notice what cravings appear, to see what fears surface when there is nothing to cling to. These reactions reveal your deepest attachments. They show you where your sense of self has been outsourced. If you allow emptiness to remain without judgment, something subtle begins to happen. The space becomes less threatening. The quiet becomes less loud. You start to notice a presence underneath the absence, a stillness that was always there but drowned out by constant seeking. This is why emptiness often precedes transformation. Before a new structure is built, the old one must be cleared. Before a deeper sense of purpose can form, superficial meaning must dissolve. Before you can meet life directly, The filters must fall away. Emptiness is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something false has fallen away. It signals readiness. Readiness to stop chasing. Readiness to stop clinging. Readiness to stop defining yourself by what can be taken from you. When you stop interpreting emptiness as a punishment, you stop fighting it. And when you stop fighting it, it stops hurting in the same way. The signal becomes clearer. The message becomes calmer. You begin to understand that emptiness is not the absence of life, but the pause that allows life to rearrange itself around truth. Attachment creates noise where silence is required because attachment is born from fear, not from clarity. Fear of loss, fear of emptiness, fear of not being enough. When the mind attaches, it begins to speak endlessly. It plans, worries, replays, imagines, and controls. This constant inner dialogue becomes noise, and in that noise, truth cannot be heard. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is the absence of inner resistance. It is the state where perception is clear, where awareness is not distorted by desire or fear. But attachment cannot tolerate silence. Silence exposes attachment for what it is, a dependence on something external to stabilize the self. So attachment fills the inner space with thoughts, stories, and emotional reactions to avoid that exposure. When you are attached to an outcome, the mind becomes restless. It asks, will it work? What if it fails? What if I lose this? Each question adds another layer of noise. The present moment becomes unreachable because attention is trapped in imagined futures or rewritten pasts. Silence would reveal that none of those projections are real. That is why attachment resists it. Attachment convinces you that thinking equals control, that if you analyze enough, worry enough, hold tightly enough, you can prevent pain. But this is an illusion. Thinking does not prevent loss. It only multiplies suffering by keeping the nervous system in constant alert. Silence, on the other hand, allows reality to unfold without interference. Noise feels productive, but it is exhausting. Silence feels empty at first, but it is honest. Attachment prefers exhaustion over honesty because honesty requires surrender. To be silent internally is to accept uncertainty, and attachment is built on the refusal to accept uncertainty. This is why moments that require deep clarity often feel uncomfortable. When you are faced with a life decision, silence is needed. Not opinions, not validation, not endless research, but attachment floods the mind with noise, pulling attention away from intuition. You mistake anxiety for guidance because it is louder. Attachment creates emotional noise as well. Strong reactions, jealousy, possessiveness, fear of abandonment. These emotions are not signs of love or care. They are signs of clinging. True connection is quiet. It does not need constant reassurance. It does not demand control. It exists without tension. Where silence is required, attachment panics. Silence would reveal that you are already whole without what you are clinging to. That realization feels threatening to the ego, which survives on dependency. So attachment keeps the mind busy, loud, distracted. Consider how the body feels when attachment is strong. Tight chest, shallow breath, restlessness. The body is signaling overload. Silence would allow the nervous system to settle. But attachment resists relaxation because relaxation removes the sense of urgency it uses to justify itself. In relationships, attachment creates endless interpretation. A delayed message becomes a story. A change in tone becomes a threat. Silence between two people becomes unbearable, so it is filled with assumptions and fears. But that silence was never empty. It was neutral. Attachment turns neutrality into danger. In ambition, attachment creates pressure. You are no longer working from purpose, but from fear of failure or comparison. The mind races, measuring progress, imagining judgment. Silence would reconnect you to intrinsic motivation, but attachment needs external outcomes to feel secure. Attachment also distorts perception. You no longer see things as they are, but as you need them to be. This distortion creates more noise because reality keeps conflicting with your expectations. Silence would dissolve those expectations, but attachment refuses to release them. There are moments in life where silence is not optional. Grief, transition, identity shifts, internal realignment. These moments cannot be rushed or reasoned through. They require stillness. But attachment tries to rush them, explain them away, or avoid them altogether. The result is prolonged confusion. Attachment is loud because it is insecure. Silence is quiet because it is grounded. When you sit in silence, you begin to notice how unnecessary most of your mental activity is. You realize that many thoughts are repetitions, not insights. Attachment relies on repetition to stay alive. Letting go of attachment does not mean abandoning care or commitment. It means removing dependency from your engagement. You can participate fully without clinging. You can care deeply without gripping. When attachment loosens, noise decreases naturally. Silence is where alignment happens. It is where you feel what is right without explanation. It is where you sense when something is complete. Attachment blocks this signal by overwhelming it with mental chatter. The universe does not compete for your attention. It speaks softly, through intuition, subtle discomfort, quiet clarity. But attachment drowns out these signals with urgency and fear. This is why people often say they feel disconnected from themselves. They are not disconnected, they are overwhelmed. When attachment relaxes, silence returns. Not an empty silence, but a living one. A silence that holds awareness, presence, and direction. In that silence, decisions become simpler. Relationships become cleaner. Purpose becomes clearer. Attachment creates noise where silence is required because silence dissolves attachment. And the ego will always fight what threatens its grip. But when you allow silence to remain, the noise fades on its own, and what remains is not confusion, but a calm recognition of what no longer needs to be held. The universe removes what the ego refuses to release because the ego is designed to cling, not to evolve. Its function is to protect an identity, even when that identity has become outdated or restrictive. The ego does not ask whether something is aligned with growth. It only asks whether something feels familiar and controllable. When familiarity becomes a cage, the universe intervenes. Removal is not random. It follows prolonged resistance. Long before something is taken away, there are signs, subtle discomfort, repeated frustration, a quiet sense that something no longer fits. The ego ignores these signals because releasing feels like losing power. So the tension builds. When the inner refusal becomes too rigid, life applies pressure from the outside. The ego believes holding on equals strength. In reality, it is often weakness disguised as control. The ego clings to relationships that have expired, roles that no longer reflect truth, narratives that limit possibility. It tells you that letting go would mean failure, abandonment, or emptiness. But the longer you hold on, the more misaligned you become. The universe does not negotiate with resistance. It responds to imbalance. When you insist on carrying what is no longer yours, life begins to remove it through events rather than insight. What could have been released gently is taken abruptly. What could have been ended consciously is ended for you. People often ask why loss feels so violent. It is not because the universe is harsh, it is because the grip was tight. The force of removal matches the intensity of attachment. The more identity you attach to something, the more disruptive its removal feels. The ego interprets removal as betrayal. It says, "This should not have happened." But the universe does not operate on personal preference. It operates on alignment. When something blocks your next phase of growth, it becomes unstable. That instability manifests as endings. The ego also confuses endurance with wisdom. It prides itself on staying, tolerating, surviving. But endurance without awareness becomes self-betrayal. The universe removes what you stay loyal to at the cost of your own expansion. This is why repeated patterns appear in life. You lose the same type of relationship, the same opportunity collapses, the same conflict arises in different forms. These are not coincidences. They are indications that the ego has refused the lesson, so the universe repeats the experience with increasing intensity. The ego resists because release requires humility. It requires admitting that something you invested in no longer serves you, that your understanding was incomplete, that change is necessary. The ego avoids this admission by holding on and hoping things will return to how they were. But life only moves forward. When the universe removes something, it is not erasing value, it is reclaiming energy. Energy that was trapped in maintenance, justification, and denial. Once released, that energy becomes available for growth, clarity, and creation. Often, the removal feels like collapse, identity dissolves, certainty disappears. The ego panics because it no longer knows who it is without what was lost. This disorientation is not a mistake, it is a reset. When the ego loses its reference points, deeper awareness has space to emerge. The universe removes attachments that prevent you from meeting yourself directly. As long as you define yourself by what you possess, who you are with, or how you are perceived, you remain externally anchored. Removal cuts those anchors. People often say, "I didn't see it coming." In truth, the body knew long before the mind accepted. Exhaustion, resentment, anxiety, these were signals. The ego dismissed them because releasing felt threatening. The universe responded by making release unavoidable. There is a difference between surrender and surrender being forced. Voluntary surrender is quiet. Forced surrender is chaotic. The lesson is the same, but the experience differs. The universe always prefers consciousness over crisis, but it will use crisis if consciousness is absent. When something is removed, the ego immediately searches for replacement. Another relationship, another goal, another distraction. But replacement without integration leads to repetition. The space created by removal is meant for understanding, not immediate refilling. The universe removes what the ego refuses to release to restore balance between who you are and how you live. Growth requires subtraction as much as addition. Without removal, expansion becomes impossible. When you stop fighting removal and begin to observe it, a shift occurs. What once felt like loss begins to feel like relief. The constant effort to maintain something misaligned disappears. The nervous system settles. The mind quiets. The ego believes it knows what you need. The universe responds to what you are ready to become. These two agendas often conflict. When they do, the universe always wins. What is removed was never meant to define you permanently. It was a phase, a lesson, a mirror. The pain comes from mistaking the mirror for the self. When the mirror breaks, the ego feels shattered, but awareness remains untouched. Every removal carries an invitation to loosen identification, to release control, to trust movement instead of permanence, to step into a version of yourself that no longer requires clinging. The universe removes what the ego refuses to release, because growth cannot coexist with rigidity, and life will always choose evolution over comfort. Letting go is not loss, even though the mind experiences it as such. The mind measures value through possession, continuity, and familiarity. When something leaves, the mind calculates absence and calls it loss. But alignment is not measured by what stays. It is measured by what fits. When something no longer fits the direction of your inner growth, holding on becomes distortion, not stability. Loss implies that something essential has been taken from you. Alignment reveals that what left was never essential to who you are becoming. It may have been important for a time. It may have shaped you, taught you, supported you. But importance does not equal permanence. Letting go does not erase meaning, it completes it. Most suffering around letting go comes from identity confusion. You attach your sense of self to roles, relationships, outcomes, and expectations. When these dissolve, the ego feels as though it is dissolving too. But what is dissolving is not the self, it is the attachment. Alignment requires that the self remains fluid, not fixed to temporary forms. You fear letting go because you believe it will create emptiness. But misalignment creates a deeper emptiness than release ever could. Staying where you no longer belong drains energy, dulls awareness, and breeds quiet resentment. Letting go feels sharp at first, but misalignment corrodes slowly and continuously. Alignment is quiet. It does not force, beg, or convince. It feels natural even when it is challenging. When something requires constant effort just to maintain, that effort is often a sign of resistance, not commitment. Letting go removes the resistance, allowing life to move with less friction. The ego equates effort with value. It says, if I worked hard for this, I must keep it. But effort does not sanctify misalignment. You can invest years into something and still need to release it. Alignment does not reward endurance for its own sake. It rewards honesty. Letting go requires trust in movement rather than attachment to outcome. You do not always know what comes next, and that uncertainty frightens the mind. But alignment does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds step by step. Each release clears the path for the next signal. Many people delay letting go because they wait for certainty. But certainty is a product of alignment, not a prerequisite. You move first. Clarity follows. Holding on in search of reassurance keeps you stuck between directions. Letting go is often mistaken for giving up. But giving up comes from exhaustion and defeat. Letting go comes from recognition. Recognition that something has completed its role in your life. Recognition that forcing continuation will only deepen imbalance. The body often knows before the mind accepts. Tightness, fatigue, irritation, numbness. These are physical signals of misalignment. Letting go restores flow to the body, even if the mind protests. Alignment does not always feel comfortable, but it feels clean. There is less internal argument, less justification, less explanation. You stop negotiating with yourself. That simplicity is not emptiness, it is coherence. You are taught to fear release because you are taught to equate stability with sameness. But true stability comes from adaptability. Letting go strengthens adaptability. It trains you to trust your capacity to respond rather than your ability to control. Every time you let go consciously, you reclaim energy that was tied up in maintenance. Maintenance of appearances, maintenance of expectations, maintenance of stories that no longer match reality. That energy returns as clarity, presence, and renewed direction. Alignment also changes how you relate to others. You stop clinging, you stop needing, you engage from choice rather than fear. Relationships become lighter, more honest. You allow people to be who they are instead of who you need them to be. Letting go does not mean you stop caring, it means you stop gripping. Care flows freely, grip restricts. When grip loosens, love becomes cleaner. Work becomes more purposeful. Effort becomes meaningful rather than compulsive. The mind resists alignment because alignment dissolves false control. But control was never security. It was tension disguised as safety. Letting go releases that tension, revealing a steadiness that does not depend on circumstances. You are not losing parts of yourself when you let go. You are shedding layers that were never fully yours. Social conditioning, borrowed expectations, outgrown ambitions. These layers served a purpose once, but alignment requires subtraction. Life is constantly adjusting. Growth is not linear. What aligned you in one phase may restrict you in another. Letting go allows evolution to continue without dragging the past forward. When you view letting go as alignment, release stops feeling like failure. It becomes an act of intelligence, a response to inner truth rather than external pressure. The more you align, the less dramatic letting go becomes. You recognize the signals earlier. You release with less resistance. You move with life instead of being pulled by it. Letting go is not loss. It is the moment your inner direction and outer life begin to match again. What feels like emptiness is space being prepared, though the mind rarely interprets it that way. The mind wants presence, activity, and definition. It wants fullness in the form of people, possessions, achievements, and certainty. When these familiar forms are removed or no longer serve, the mind panics and calls the resulting quiet an openness emptiness. But this emptiness is not a void in the sense of nothingness. It is a container, a preparation, a clearing of the inner and outer landscape to make room for what is next. We are conditioned to fear emptiness because our perception of life is built on accumulation. We accumulate identities, relationships, tasks, plans, validation, and expectations. We learn to measure progress and worth by how much we hold, achieve, and maintain. When those structures fade, disappear, or are disrupted, the mind perceives absence as loss. It labels the quiet not as an opportunity, but as a failure, a lack, a hollow where something should be. Yet in truth, emptiness is often a generous act of the universe, a removal that creates possibility rather than deprivation. Space cannot be prepared while it is full. A cup that already holds water cannot receive new water. A mind overwhelmed by attachment, distraction, and resistance cannot receive clarity, insight, or growth. When what feels like emptiness arises, it is not designed to punish you, but to reset you. It clears what has expired, what was never meant to continue, what has become a source of misalignment. The timing may feel cruel because it forces stillness in a world that rewards movement, but it is precise because it precedes the arrival of what is truly aligned with your life. Most people experience this preparatory space as discomfort. They describe it as loneliness, sadness, fear, boredom, or anxiety. But these sensations are not the emptiness itself. They are the mind's interpretation of unfamiliar silence. When the mind is no longer busy with external stimuli or internal noise, it confronts itself. Patterns of thought, hidden fears, unprocessed desires, and illusions of control all surface in that quiet. What the mind calls emptiness is actually a clearing process, a preparatory space for awareness to rise unfiltered by attachment. This space operates like soil being tilled before a new seed is planted. You cannot force the seed into fertile ground if the soul remains hard and compacted. Similarly, insight, growth, and transformation cannot take root in a mind that remains crowded by unresolved attachments and outdated expectations. The discomfort you feel is analogous to tilling. The earth must be loosened, aerated, and cleared before new growth is possible. In this way, what feels like loss or emptiness is in fact the preparation for the next phase of life. The body also participates in this clearing. Physical restlessness, fatigue, tightness, and subtle unease are signals that energy is being reallocated. The nervous system adjusts when something ends, when routines are disrupted, when familiar emotional or mental anchors are removed. What feels like emptiness in your heart and mind is mirrored by the body preparing to receive a different frequency of energy. The physical sensations are often misread as weakness, but they are actually a calibration, a preparation for more aligned expression and experience. The universe or life itself has no attachment to your attachment. It moves forward, clears space, and creates opportunities, whether or not the ego is ready. What feels like emptiness is the moment before these opportunities arrive. It is the time when you can no longer rely on old structures, old comforts, old identities, or old habits. This enforced clearing can feel destabilizing because the ego prefers continuity, security, and predictability. Yet the purpose is not to destabilize for the sake of suffering, but to create the conditions necessary for true stability to emerge, one that is internal, adaptable, and aligned with life as it is, not as you wish it to be. Preparation in emptiness also requires surrender. Resistance prolongs discomfort because it tries to force the old to remain, tries to maintain attachment to what no longer serves. The ego argues that clinging equals strength, that fear of loss equals importance, and that survival depends on holding tightly. But the space being prepared does not reward clinging, it rewards release. Each moment spent resisting emptiness is energy diverted from alignment, growth, and the natural flow of life. Surrendering does not mean giving up or abandoning. It means recognizing that the clearing process is necessary, that space must be made before the new can enter, that emptiness is not absence but preparation. This preparatory emptiness also refines perception. Without the clutter of constant input and attachment, subtle signals from intuition, instinct, and the body become more apparent. The mind that is used to controlling, manipulating, or measuring every outcome finds this quiet, unsettling at first, but in time, clarity arises. What feels like emptiness is the stage on which awareness becomes visible. It is where true desire can be distinguished from fear, where real priorities are seen clearly, and where insight emerges naturally rather than through struggle. Emptiness as preparation also challenges attachment to identity. Roles, labels, and past achievements that once defined you begin to lose relevance in this space. When the ego cannot rely on these markers, it experiences discomfort. Yet, this shedding is necessary for the next level of self-expression. New patterns, new understandings, and new ways of being require an inner landscape cleared of obsolete definitions and outdated dependencies. The emptiness is not a vacuum. It is fertile ground waiting for life to imprint itself anew. The discomfort and restlessness that accompany emptiness are therefore not punishments, they are invitations. Invitations to pause, to reflect, to witness, and to recognize that the space being created is not empty in the sense of void, but full in the sense of potential. It is a subtle fullness that cannot be measured by acquisition, activity, or control. It is a richness that arrives precisely because something else has been removed. Because alignment requires subtraction before addition, because life prepares the field before planting the seed. You cannot receive while your hands are full. Yet this is one of the hardest truths for the mind to accept. The mind believes that holding tightly is safety, that clinging to what you have or what you think you need is protection against loss. Yet holding on too tightly blocks the flow of life. It blocks opportunity, insight, and growth. When your hands are full with attachments, expectations, regrets, or illusions, there is no space left for what is truly aligned to enter. Receiving requires emptiness. Receiving requires readiness. Receiving requires release. Most people think they are prepared to receive when they are busy, when they have filled every moment with activity, responsibility, or distraction. But the hands that are full cannot open. They cannot accept. They cannot let new energy, new people, new understanding, or new opportunities into their lives because they are already occupied. Life gives only to space, and space requires letting go. Holding tightly to the familiar is comforting because it is predictable. You know what you have, what to expect, and how to manage it. But the familiar is often a trap. It may be a relationship that no longer nurtures, a career that no longer inspires, or a belief that no longer serves. The longer you cling, the less you can see what is coming toward you. You may think you are secure, but in truth, you are blocking abundance. The hands full of old attachments cannot grasp what is new. The difficulty lies in fear. Fear of emptiness, fear of change, fear of being without. This fear convinces you to hold on, to maintain, to accumulate. The ego interprets release as risk, loss, or vulnerability. But the paradox is that only by releasing can you receive what is greater than the fear. The ego equates fullness with possession and possession with security. But security is never in accumulation. It is in the ability to adapt, in the willingness to let go, in the clarity of purpose unclouded by excess. Emotional attachments often occupy the hands long before you realize it. You cling to people, to expectations of their behavior, to outcomes that have not arrived. The mind rehearses scenarios, stores memories, and calculates futures, and all of this mental activity occupies inner space. You believe you are engaged, connected, and prepared, but you are busy holding on to what is no longer available or no longer serves. The moment you release these attachments, you create a capacity for something real, something new, something aligned. Even opportunities are blocked by a fullness of expectation. You may want a new job, a new relationship, a new direction, but you are still holding tightly to the old one. You tell yourself that it is loyalty, responsibility, or practicality, but it is attachment. When the hands are full of what was, the universe cannot place what is ready to arrive. The container must be empty before the gift can be delivered. Physical and mental clutter has the same effect. A mind crowded with overthinking, regret, comparison, or anxiety cannot receive inspiration, guidance, or intuition. A body overloaded with activity and distraction cannot receive stillness, restoration, or insight. The fullness must be released to create a receptive state. This is why pauses, retreats, reflection, and solitude are so often necessary before growth, transformation, or clarity appears. Life often forces space through endings, disruptions, or loss because the hands that resist emptying will not voluntarily release. Holding on also limits perception. The mind sees only what aligns with what is already holding. It filters reality to reinforce possession and attachment. Anything outside that framework is ignored or resisted. New possibilities, new understandings, and new experiences cannot enter because the mind is preoccupied. To receive, you must first release the filters. You must empty the hands, empty the mind, and empty the heart. Only then can what is truly aligned be perceived, accepted, and integrated. Even in relationships, the principle holds. You cannot fully love or connect when you are gripping tightly to control, expectation, or fear. When hands are full of past grievances, unspoken needs, or imagined futures, there is no room for genuine presence. Love flows only into hands that are open. Presence flourishes only when the need to hold is replaced by the willingness to release. The fullness that comes from attachment blocks intimacy, understanding, and connection. Spiritual and personal growth are also impossible when the hands are full. The ego clings to identity, to belief systems, to self-concepts that feel safe. Transformation demands that these be surrendered. Letting go is not abandonment, but preparation. The universe will not place wisdom, clarity, or opportunity in a container that is already full. The hands must open to receive, and opening requires trust, courage, and the willingness to risk perceived loss. Life constantly presents gifts, lessons, and guidance, but they cannot be received until there is capacity. The timing of loss endings and clearing is precise. The universe often removes what you cling to so that space can be created for what is next. What feels like deprivation is often the act of creating room for alignment, expansion, and evolution. The hands full of old attachments, false expectations, or misaligned investments cannot take hold of these gifts. The process is subtle but profound. When you begin to let go of what no longer serves, when you release fear, resistance, and attachment, space emerges naturally. The hands unclench, the mind quiets, the heart softens, the capacity to receive expands. In that state, life can flow. Opportunities that were invisible become visible. Connections that were blocked become possible. Insights that were unreachable become clear. To receive fully, one must prioritize readiness over retention. Retention is the habit of grasping, clinging, and controlling. Readiness is the act of emptying, surrendering, and trusting. While the hands are full, all else is blocked. When the hands are empty, everything has room to arrive, and presence becomes fertile ground for what life intends to give.